Hey guys, what's up? Serena here from thriftdiving.com. So if you're like most people, this is what happens to you. You get a leak in your toilet, your tub, your refrigerator. It comes down to the bottom level, and after it gets fixed, you leave the hole in your ceiling for a long time. I'm not going to judge because this is what happened to me. This hole you see here is from a refrigerator that busted probably 3 years ago, and it took me that long to fix it. So let's actually walk through how do you actually fix this. So you see I've got a tape measure here, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to measure how big the hole is, because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut a rectangular piece of drywall that's going to go right here in place, and we're going to fix this. Now, if you go to Home Depot or go to Lowe's, you're going to get a piece of drywall that's like this. They're $5. So what I'm doing is I'm just using a straight edge, and I'm actually putting these dimensions onto the drywall because we're going to cut out this piece, and we're basically making a large patch. And then I'm just going to use a utility knife to score the drywall. Now you're going to do this on the front side, which is the white side of the drywall. You'll score it twice, and once you flip it over and just sort of gently pull it up, this baby's going to snap. And all you do is just use the utility knife to separate it, and it's that simple. Now, depending on the size of the patch that you need, you might have to make a couple of other cuts. So for me, I needed to cut one more piece off so that I could get it perfect to the size that I need. Here's the thing, when you're cutting with the utility knife, there are going to be some little edges that probably need to be shaved down a little bit. The easiest way to do this is to just use your utility knife and just clean away some of the extra pieces that's still kind of poking out. And once it's all cut out, I'm going to hold it over top of where the damage is in the ceiling, and then I'm just going to trace around it. If you've got a flat ceiling without any of this textured stuff going on, then you should be able to get a nice clean line. Now, once everything is drawn, you want to make sure that your damage is contained within that traced out area, because that's what we're going to be cutting out. Now, before we can actually cut, we need to know what's behind the drywall. So I typically just reach my hand in there, make sure that there's no electrical, no wires, no plumbing, and also you don't want to cut your studs, so be very careful and make sure you use a stud finder so you see what's behind the wall. Now I'm starting with a drywall knife, but then I just kind of ditch that because it doesn't work too well. I want nice clean lines when I'm trying to patch a hole in the ceiling or in the wall. So this is a Dremel. I actually bought this 10 years ago, and whenever I've needed to patch a drywall hole, this is the tool that I tend to go for. And I'm actually using a drywall cutting head, which works really well. Now, once everything is cut and you're ready to start pulling the pieces away, be very careful. You don't want to pull any pieces and damage the nearby drywall. So you'll see here that I'm just kind of breaking off each of the pieces that I just cut. And you might find that there's a little spot that doesn't quite come off. If that's the case, just use your Dremel, or if you have the drywall tool there and you can just sort of, cut it out, then that's fine. So the next part is actually cutting the boards that you're going to need in order to put behind the drywall so that you can hold the patch that you made in place. This is what we're going to be securing it to. Now, if you don't have a jigsaw or another tool for cutting, you can go to the home improvement store and have these pieces cut. It's no problem. Just make sure that they're long enough and that they're wide enough for the hole that you just cut. Now, here are some scrap boards I'm using. They're 1x2s. It was a little bit too thin. You'll notice that I'm very close to the edge, and when you try to secure this board to the drywall, it should not be right on the edge. If it is, you're going to probably break the drywall, and I noticed that it was starting to crack a little. Now, you'll notice that the board on the left and the one on the right, I decided to replace those. Thankfully, I had an extra piece of scrap wood. It was longer. I think this is maybe 1x3, so it's thicker. It was longer, and I was able to get those drywall screws in there and not damage the ends of the drywall. And once the boards are in place, you can set your patch in there and it should fit pretty good. If you don't get a good fit, just clean the edges up with your utility knife. Okay, this tool that I'm holding here, this is called a screw gun. This is something most homeowners aren't going to have. It's made specifically for drywall. But if you have just a normal power drill, you can get this 99-cent screw setter. This will give you that little dimple. You want that drywall screw to have a little bit of an inset so that when you put joint compound, when you mud it, it pretty much becomes hidden behind the drywall. All right, so we're going into just the pieces of wood, and this is how it's going to stay in place. Pretty fantastic, right? So let's talk a little bit about the tape that I'm using. Now, there's actually two different types of tape that you can use when you're drywalling and you're covering up these joints. This is fiberglass tape, which I like because it has a stickiness to it, which you can't really tell, it's falling down. It's got a stickiness to it, and you can go right over this joint, and if you press hard enough, it should stick. Now, remember, I've got some textured ceilings here, so it's a little bit more difficult for the tape to stick to that. But the other kind of joint tape is a paper tape. I think that one's a little bit more difficult to use personally, so we're not going to cover that in this video. We're just going to do the fiberglass tape. And the reason why we're taping this is because we want to make sure that this joint is going to be secure. We don't want this, tearing or breaking or anything like that. And the tape actually helps to prevent that from happening. And the challenge you'll probably run into with the fiberglass tape is that when you go to apply the joint compound, this is already pre-mixed, which is good. There's a material list down below, but you have to actually cover up this tape with the joint compound, and that can be challenging because you're trying to blend in this patch with the rest of the drywall. So making sure also that you're covering up this green tape or whatever color it may be. So the first thing that you typically want to do is try to cover with a thin layer, but enough that you're covering up this tape for the first pass over it with maybe about an 8-inch knife. And then once that dries, you'll go back over it and try to fill in some of these low spots, high spots. Now, I will admit, I think I did this entire area in just a few moments. And then the next day I came back and did another really kind of haphazard patching job. I didn't really take as much care in making sure that this was nice and flat and smooth because I knew I was going to be texturing this with some of the joint compound. So you'll notice that once it had dried, this actually had dried for probably a few months. I'm not going to lie, I just patched it and then walked away and left it, but it was time to get back to it. Generally, you should let it dry for about a day or two and then you come back over it with sandpaper. Don't wait for months like I did. Make sure you're wearing your mask, make sure you've got some safety glasses on, and try to make it as smooth as possible. Sometimes I even like to use an orbital sander just to smooth it out, or a drywall sander. Now, I actually had to mix up a little bit of the joint compound with some water because I needed to do a textured ceiling, which I don't like the look of textured ceiling, but this is what my basement has, and it was the easiest way to get this patch done. So I'm just using a microfiber towel, any sort of towel or washcloth or rag, and I'm just steepling it on the ceiling, and it's doing a pretty good job of blending in. Once it dried 24 hours later, I went over it with a coat of primer, and I'm just using this small little roller that I had lying around. And when it was time to do the semi-gloss paint, then I used one of the larger rollers that's good for rough surfaces. And let's just take a look of what this looked like before. This is what it looked like. It literally stayed like this for 3 years. It was so embarrassing when people came over. And now it just kind of blends in. Is it a perfect patch? No, but it's not noticeable unless you knew it was there. And now when people come over, I don't have to be embarrassed. So hopefully these instructions will help you cover any holes in your ceiling. This also works for any big holes in your wall. And you can find a link down below to a blog post to help you out with this. And come back again, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I will see you next video.